What's wrong with a 6'5", 260, 70-pound interior defensive lineman that runs a 4.5? That sounds like a pretty good player to me. I'll take that all day long.
I think one of the more interesting player progressions that we've seen throughout the course of this season is Georgia defensive lineman Travon Walker, 6'0", 5'0", 272 pounds, 35.5 on the arms. This is the real deal as far as all your measurables, all your traits. Brentley, how close are those traits in your mind as the guy who did the write-up on Travon Walker to being a high-level impact starter at the NFL level?
Well, I mean, from a traits perspective, you have everything you want, right? He has the length, he has the explosiveness, he has the size and the height. And one thing that I really appreciate what you did there is you called him a defensive lineman, right? Because for me, and where I struggle with this player, is I don't know if I see him as a traditional edge, right? Where he's really being talked about right now as someone who, you know, can rival the likes of Aiden Hutchinson or Kayvon Thibodeau or Jermaine Johnson in terms of rushing from the edge and the outside. Based on tape, that's not where I saw this player win. I think he's actually best utilized interior, where he was used quite a bit at Georgia, and he's putting a lot of stress on this interior offensive lineman with his quickness, with his length, with his ability to convert speed to power. And that's where he won most of his reps. And for me, when I talk about him as a top 5 pick, because there hasn't been a player in this entire draft process that's really helped himself and boosted his stock more than Travon Walker, right? I mean, think about when the season ended, he was, you know, the mid-first round, you know, maybe even towards the back of the first round conversation. And then he blows up the combine. And then just the momentum keeps coming and coming and coming to the point where it would be a shock if he's not a top 5 pick. And for me, when I look at a top 5 pick at edge, I need someone who can bend. I need someone who could really rush off the edge and really get home to the quarterback. And I didn't see that type of finish ability in Travon Walker on tape. Now, again, going back to his traits, he has everything you would want. The explosiveness, he has 35-inch arms, you know, he can move. I mean, he's extremely good player in terms of his physical capabilities, but just projecting him to the next level, where do you play him? And me, I would play him inside, so for that, I wouldn't have him that high. I think I gave him a late first round pick, so definitely a lot lower than the consensus, but there's no doubt in his physical upside.
This reminds me a lot of the people that didn't like DK Metcalf because he didn't run routes like Antonio Brown. Like, we shouldn't discriminate against Travon Walker because he doesn't bend the edge like Von Miller, right? He knows how to reduce rush angles and really create that path to the quarterback. So no, he's not going to be like Josh Allen and run circles around offensive tackles, but what he can do is use that length and that power and his explosiveness to reduce rush angles and get to the quarterback. And so that's where I get a little bit more comfort in him playing as a true edge and being able to win around the outside hip. It's because he does have the traits to soften angles, reduce those angles, and get home.
And while I agree with Brentley, I think he is a better interior defensive lineman, I don't think that's a problem, though, right? What's wrong with a 6'5", 260, 70-pound interior defensive lineman that runs a 4.5? That sounds like a pretty good player to me. I'll take that all day long on the interior defensive line. So I do think he will win a lot at the interior defensive line position. I still think he has that versatility. I think this is a very good football player, and we talked about the traits. I think he's going to knock it out the park on the next level.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his length and his power and the violence and viciousness he plays with. We talk about, you know, pop on the tape against Michigan, that play where he blows up was I think it was a guard.
It was the center. Poor Vastardis come pulling around.
You don't really see a lot of ends have that ability to just come step in and meet with that type of physicality and punish the puller is what I call it. So he has that versatility. I could see him as like a 4-3 end, and if you want to kick him, you know, on rundowns, because think about it. How many tight ends really going to block this 6'6", 275-pound, 35-inch arm defensive end, and then you kick him inside where he will probably have the quickest path to the quarterback with his hands, his length, and his speed and the athleticism. So I think he's just a really versatile guy. The main thing is if he's going to be a top 5 pick, you got to have a plan for him. You know, don't bring him in like Joe said and think, hey, I'm gonna get an impressive bench from this young man.
Yeah.
Come in with a plan, know how you want to use him, how you want to attack offenses, and you're gonna get the best out of him.
So, hearing this conversation, I mean, we had a summer exposure to this player, we had an in-season exposure to this player, we had a regional presentation exposure to this player, we had a cross-check exposure to this player, and now we're talking now. And it took the 5th time for me to get a comp that I think is pretty interesting as far as you think about his usage at the NFL level, kind of the narrative about who he was as a player at the college level. What do you guys remember about Emmanuel Ogbah coming out of Oklahoma State in 2016?
It's interesting.
Similar conversation.
Super long, super explosive, linear. He's a little tight in the hips, little inexperienced with his hand counters. You have questions about what his ceiling is. Emmanuel Ogbah took him a little bit of time. He had a high flash in Kansas City. He arrives in Miami, plays in a base odd front defense where he's that 5 tech that's on that offensive tackle with a rush linebacker outside of him. And then you get into obvious passing situations and you can stand him up because he's so explosive. He ran a 4.6. I think he was a high 30s in the vertical, so the lower body explosiveness was there. And he's another guy with like 35-inch arms. Now, that might not be what you want to hear for we're projecting this guy's a top 5 pick, but that's an example of somebody who profiles with comparable conditions, who has found a path and has logged 9 sacks in each of the last 2 seasons combined. I think he leads the NFL in passes defensed among defensive linemen in the last 2 seasons combined, and he just got a contract that pays him over $15 million per season on a contract extension.
And let me be very clear. I like Travon Walker as a player, right? I mean, I think in the right circumstance, in the right usage, he can be a very productive pro. I mean, his ability as a run defender is outstanding, and that's translatable. So I think he's going to be a very productive NFL player. It's just when we start getting into the conversation of, hey, he's going to be a top 5 pick, you draft edges in the top 5 to get to the quarterback and win off the edge and be that sack artist. That's what we look for in edges. I mean, that's just fact.
So let me ask you this, and it's about the top 10 in this year's class.
Yeah.
How many of the guys that you covet as the top 10 players in this class do you feel like that narrative is appropriate for where they are ranked versus what you're getting as a perceived return? Because that's always a hard spot for all of us when we sit down. It's like, man, I don't know that I got 10 guys I would draft in the top 10.
I mean, this class, I feel kind of good. I'm not going to lie. I think this class is really, really good, all things considered. I mean, you have the tackles. I think they're all worthy of the top 10. I think we have 3 edge rushers that are worthy of the top 10. Not Travon Walker, but, you know, Jermaine Johnson, KT, and Hutchinson. To me, I value the corners. I think Sauce, Derek Stingley, and Booth. Even for me, Devin Lloyd. I think he's worthy of that conversation as well. So, I mean, when you're comparing Walker and his potential year 1 impact in relation to the top 10 of this year's class, I think it falls short. Now, that being said, his traits, his ability as a run defender, projecting him, for me, inside, you can get a Pro Bowler. Like, you really could. It's just a matter of, is he going to be that difference-making pass rusher, which ideally you're drafting in the top 5, in the top 10? I don't know if he's ever going to be that guy, right? Maybe he would be from rushing inside, but how often does interior defensive lineman go in the top 5?
Yeah.
You know, you really don't see that. And so, again, I think he's a really good player. I think there has to be a specific way to use him. I don't think he's for everybody, clearly. But bet on the traits and you see what you can get out of him.
Bet on the traits. There it is. That's like our word of the day here for this draft cycle with Joe Marino.
Elite traits at a premium position. Sign me up.
Yeah.
Well, Brentley, we'll revisit this conversation after we know where he lands. But Travon Walker, University of Georgia, one of our top defensive linemen eligible for the 2022 NFL Draft.